questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live? There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast, Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we have with us
Abigail.
Abigail Boone.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, Abigail Boone.
Do you think that'd be my wrestler name?
Wow. Honestly, even though I'd never call you this and I don't like
you
it.
say Big Gail.
It is Big Gail. That is it. That is
Come glomping down.
Big Gail.
Big Gail.
You don't even, it doesn't even have to, you have to be, I mean, that's just, you're
no,
big. I'm Big Gail.
I wouldn't physically buff up, but I would always stand like that.
Yeah. and your finishing move would be something like, a play on words of boom and boon or something like that.
Yeah. The boon.
Yeah. I just found out that I share a birthday with Randy Macho Man Savage, which Abigail has no idea what I'm talking about, but it's kind of a big deal for me. I'm pretty excited about it. I immediately texted my wife. Anyways,
the exciting news.
This exciting news that I can't believe I'm just now finding out. I mean, you know who would have been really, really, really excited about that?
Childhood Charlie.
14-year-old Charlie Lofton.
Yeah.
Could not have been more excited about
Fair.
that. Anyways, we are in a long podcast series where we are working our way through systematic theology. We spent some time talking about what that is, talking about who God is, talking about what the Bible is. And now we've been doing some Q&A to kind of catch up, to make sure that we are processing all of this correctly. And we just finished some Q&A on our last episode. So if you've not checked that out, I encourage you to pause it, go back and catch that, because this is going to kind of build somewhat on that. So we are going to pick up with some Q&A on the systematic theology stuff we've covered with the queen of question asking, Abigail Boone.
Thank you. Yes. So
you're going to drop the boon on me?
The boon. I need to do like a sound pad where it just has like those sound effects. Yeah. So we left off talking about Trinitarianism, all the things to do with that. So still talking on God, but we're going to shift a little bit. So we talked about, I'm not going to get all the omnis right, but the omnibenevolent, I guess, is one of them.
Is all good, all loving, yeah.
All of those things. So I feel like probably one of the hardest things to come up against here is just our cultural norms of how we view some of those adjectives, if you will. And so one that's been kind of popping in my mind just because of the news and our current political system and all of those things, that it can kind of be hard to understand a God of justice, mercy, all of those things in light of how we view justice, mercy, all of those things. So kind of paint a picture of how you would set apart what our current day view of what justice means and what that means in how we view God and what it means for God to be a just God.
Well, three things kind of popped into my mind in rapid succession as you were asking that.
That's always a good sign.
The first one was saying that God is omnipotent, has all power, has all the power in the world. We naturally distrust power. And so I think there's a negative connotation with that, because if you've got all the power and are not doing blank, if you have all this power and you're not doing this and you're doing this instead of this, like someone who, we think of power as a corrupting influence. We think of power as oppressive. And so if God has all the power in the world, then we're likely to think of him as either oppressive or incredibly passive. And so that becomes a sticking point for us. Another one, I believe, is when we say that God is good, we believe good is the same as enjoy. And so if somebody is doing something good for me, they are doing something that I enjoy or that is helpful to me in some way and that I perceive of it as such.
Right.
And so I do not think of something as good. I don't really have a great category. We have there's a category of things that we know that are good for us, like bad tasting medicine, going to the gym, the little scraper tool that the dentist uses. We know that all of those things are agents of good. But that is not how we would primarily describe them. Those are good things.
They're beneficial.
Right. We would use a different word than good. But when we say that God is good,
some might even say necessary evil.
Right. Exactly. Right. And so when we say that God is always good, well, I'm not always feeling good. Not everything that happens to me is good. So then I question good. So that becomes a problem point. The second one, like the third one, is the justice. We confuse justice with fairness. And so the way we described it is that God is just, and what that means is he will only ever give you what you deserve, except when he is merciful or gracious, and he will give you better than what you deserve. He will never do something less to you than what you deserve. He will only give you what you deserve or better.
Or more. He's not cruel.
Okay. But, and this is a very common thing that we talk about in our political, cultural society, is the difference between equality and equity. And so if God gives everyone $100, is that good? Is that fair? Is that just? Okay, in one sense it is, but why did Elon Musk get $100?
Right. Or the person that doesn't have any money to spend or anywhere to spend it.
Right. I mean, so it's like there's a sense of like, what do we mean that God is just? And do we mean that God is fair? Does that mean, because we think of justice and fairness in terms of equal outcomes. And so we get stuck on God is not just because Elon Musk has more money than me. And we all here have more money than a lot of the people in sub-Saharan Africa. And so God cannot be just because not everybody is getting equal treatment in the world in which they live. And so then that kind of like, we just have to make sure that we're defining these terms really, really well. When we say that God is good, that God is never the one who is doing evil. When God acts, it is only for good. He never acts in evil. Does he do everything good that you could possibly conceive of as being good? Does he do that all the time? That is, no. He's not doing everything that you can think of as good at any given time. But he is always acting for good, and everything he does is good. And now we have to wrestle with, why doesn't God do more of the things that I would think are good?
I was going to say that feels like
different than God is not good.
Well, I as soon as you said that, that kind of like ticked off in my mind of that's probably where the confusion can set in of I'm praying for good things. I'm praying for good things to happen in people's lives, or I'm asking for good stuff. But the promise isn't that he will do every good thing that you ask for, but whatever he is doing is good.
Right. And he's got different definitions of good, and he's playing 5-dimensional chess, and we're playing checkers.
Right.
And there's some things that we just don't see or understand as far as the overarching good that God is trying to bring about in the world. And then again, some of these things kind of balance each other out. I mean, sometimes justice wins over grace. And I'm praying for grace, and God is going to give justice. We want the world to experience grace, but God is choosing in certain arenas to bring justice. But the world is not suffering at a level that is that is more than what it deserves, but it is not equitable in how any particular suffering is being distributed. Somebody may be getting sick more, experiencing more loss, experiencing more hunger, and that is, it can feel problematic. And I'm not saying that it's not, but now we're asking a different question. Why isn't God fair?
Right.
Why isn't God equitable? God is just is not the same as fair and equitable. So God has claimed to be just, and we believe that he is. but that is not the same as outcomes. And so now we don't trust it. Go back to the very first one. Now I don't trust him because he's a powerful person, not bringing about what I believe to be good, equitable outcomes.
Right.
And so he is abusing and or neglecting his power.
So it feels like this, I'm sure in other centuries as well, but it feels like this would be a huge stumbling block to people. One of two problems: either they have a wrong understanding with God and they really like what they've made up in their mind, or they don't like God whatsoever because they can't wrap their heads around these definitions that we're saying as something that they would want to engage with.
Yeah. And so when we talk about virtues, power, goodness, justice, grace, mercy, who gets to define what makes something good, what makes something just, what makes something right? Is it our collective opinion at any given time? Because then that has evolved over time. What has changed? It has changed. There was a time when no one would have batted an eye that poor people deserve to be poor.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying 10 years ago. I'm talking about hundreds or thousands of years ago, right? I mean, it's like, but now we view the world differently. And so now we are constantly redefining terms and asking God to catch up. Or does God get to define what is good? And some people might say, well, if God says he's good and he gets to define the term,
that's bad use of power.
then it becomes a meaningless thing, because God, whatever God is what good is. Well, okay. And so now then our journey then is to deeply understand who God is, because then I can have a better understanding about then who God is. I understand now what good is.
Right.
Am I asking God to change based on my definition of good? Or am I allowing God, now I'm trying to figure out who God is, to then change my definitions?
Right.
And we talked about this the other day on a Sunday morning where we were going through a story that was particularly problematic. Elisha calling down these bears on these people. And one of the things we talked about is how do we wrestle with a problematic story? And I think this applies to problematic stories that are happening